Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio. And now, here's our host, Dr. Vanessa Anceloni.
Welcome, dear listener, to Kardec Radio. Today, the show is about the best-selling book in the Spiritist movement, Paul and Stephen. It's going to be an inspiration for our new year. Everybody now is talking about resolutions, about what to do in the new year. What do we want to do? What do we want to be? And Paul and Stephen, the book in itself, is quite a journey that can redefine our lives, because it's the journey of two souls that really got together and made a difference. And you know, it's fascinating because so many people think that once we talk about spirits and immortality, we're going to run away from Christianity. And actually, it's all about God consciousness. It's the Christ consciousness, by definition, a set of spiritual laws that tells us about the highest levels of ethical, moral life. And you know, dear listener, Allan Kardec, in the Spirit's book, he talked about the very fact that Spiritism is Christianity's most powerful aid. It is there at the end of chapter 2, a most fascinating conclusion by Allan Kardec, telling us quite clearly that Spiritism came to the rescue of Christianity, bringing the promised Comforter, our dear message of Jesus Christ. Not only for words, it's not about words, it's about deeds, actions. And we're going to listen in this very program to 3 main excerpts of this book, Paul and Stephen, written by the Spirit author Emmanuel through the blessed mediumistic hands of Chico Xavier. We have a lot to share with you, dear listener, because Kardec Radio is here to nourish your soul. And we want to tell you more. We want to share with you that at this very moment, our sister radio, Brazeira Online, is there, right there, sharing Kardec Radio's programs every day. You can access it at spiritist.com, and there you're going to find Brazeira Online. They also have programs in Portuguese and in Spanish. It's fascinating. By the way, we have the International Spiritist Meeting happening in Cuba in March days, 22nd to the 24th. You can't miss it. You still have time to do your registration. Just go to 7cem.org and do your registration. You can't miss it, because the new year is going to unfold beautiful messages for our hearts, for our minds, for our lives. It's all about renewal. And renewal is the key word when we talk about the legacy of Paul of Tarsus. Some people call him in the Catholic Church Saint Paul, and in the Protestant Church they call him the Apostle Paul. We simply call him in Spiritism Paul. Paul of Tarsus. He is the man, the one who really overcame his own limitations. It's unbelievable. And he wasn't alone. He had companionship, not only from his beloved Abigail, but from the amazing, the great Stephen. We have a lot to share. Right now, we're going to kickstart the program with a beautiful message from the CD and book, Living and Loving, by Joana de Angelis through Divaldo Franco. And you can get a hold of it at the bookstore of the Spiritist Society of Baltimore, www.ssbaltimore.org. This message is about peace, because that's the tone of what we want in 2013. Here it is.
Chapter 17, Always in Peace.
The violence that alarms mankind and bewilders the whole planet springs from the hidden aggressiveness within the hearts of people. It generates both instability and unhappiness. Any display of evil produces unexpected reactions that may lead to hopelessness and belligerence. Jesus advised, "Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation." It was a warning to remind us to keep a balanced attitude and attend to our duties. Whatever the circumstances you might be struggling against, keep your peace. Be stern, but avoid rudeness. Enforce discipline, but avert violence. Promote education, but oppose aggressiveness. Whatever you do, do it peacefully. When mistreated or suffering, hold your peace at all costs so that you may keep your tranquility. Jesus was always calm, ineffable, and serene, regardless of circumstances around him. Real peace is rooted in absolute confidence in God. Remain undisturbed, do all the good you can, and do not line up with those who complain, are violent, or unreasonable. Your peace reveals your life as much as the way you live affects the environment around you.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
A new great book and tool for kids and educators. The children's book, Our Father by the Spirit Mei, psychographed by Chico Xavier, is available for purchase at www.edisayofamerica.com. Buy your copy today.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, welcome to our program today. It's about Paul and Stephen as the inspiration for the new year. And we all need inspiration. In the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, we learn about the laws of life. We learn about the importance of having inspiration in our lives. And God has sent, always, at all times, people, men and women, to inspire us, to lead us to righteousness, to lead us to God. And they are named prophets. And of course, the top one is the one we talked about in our Christmas show, the Messiah, the beautiful message of Jesus Christ coming to us in a completely different form. Not this one that separates people, but the message of the Christ that we're talking about here today is the message of love, of unconditional love. And you know what? If you are feeling that you are wrong and that you are not in the right path, that's the best time to be closer to Jesus. You know why? Because he himself said, I came for those who are suffering, for those who are feeling they are happy, they're done. But you know what? Jesus is closer to those who are feeling sick, who are feeling this sorrow, this anguish. Sometimes they're feeling like criminals. And the message comes for them, dear listener. And Spiritism explains this mercy that comes from this immortal and universal message. As Gandhi himself once talked about, if all the books of the world were lost, for sure, if the Sermon of the Mount remained, we had everything we needed to lead a moral, ethical life on the earth. It's about this God consciousness. It's not only about words, about deeds, actions. And in this book, Paul and Stephen, we tell you, it's the best-selling book by Emmanuel, the spirit mentor of Chico Xavier. And we had recently another show with the help of our friend Joe Cadalladone, and you can re-listen to that, talking about Emmanuel in one of his main novels, which is 2,000 years ago. But in this one, which is a masterpiece, he talks about the fanatical Pharisee, a ruthless persecutor of Christians, and the newborn Christian doctrine. This book will show to the reader the greatness of Paul of Tarsus, a courageous, daring, and sincere man who repented for his radical posture that culminated in the stoning of Christianity's first martyr, Stephen, and who humbly undertook the accelerated revision of his ideas in answer to Jesus' call. Amid persecutions, infirmities, mockery, disillusionment, desertions by friends, stonings, beatings, and imprisonment, he transformed his life into the example of labor through dozens of years of struggle by founding churches and rendered them assistance. At some point in our lives, we all received Christ's call. What have we done? What will we do in the new year? It's not about a religious sect. This book is about the journey of all of our souls. This discovery about our connection with God through Jesus, the one who is the governor of our planet. So it's most important that we align our hearts and minds with Christ. It's beyond founding a church. It's about Christ in our daily lives with ourselves. Because even though some people come to us and say, Vanessa, I love so very much. Many people are in my life and I help them very much. But I have a problem. I don't think I love myself as much as I should. So now we are at the core of the commandment. When Jesus said, the second commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. If we really don't love ourselves, we cannot love others. So it's just an appearance that we're being good and kind to others. Because if we're not being good and kind to ourselves, we can't actually show something or give something that we don't have inside of us. And that's what Spiritism is all about. Rescuing ourselves for us. Joana de Angelis quite clearly says, we must be happy. She's not saying you can, maybe. She's saying you must, meaning if you're not make people happy, we're not going to have happiness around. So it's a must in our lives. Don't tell yourself you don't deserve it, because you do, and only God can judge. We can't. So to get us to know more about this encounter, we had a whole show on Christmas Eve about the encounter with the Master. Different passages from other books. Now we are going to relate to you the very encounter that is so well known by so many people in some verses. But now Emmanuel, in this beautiful excerpt of the book Paul and Stephen, which by the way, you can buy at edisseofamerica.com at any time. In this very excerpt, you're going to find probably your encounter with Jesus. Question to all of us. Are we still resistant? This is question number 1. Question number 2. Are we still postponing it? Thinking that there are more important things in our lives to do? What are we doing? So Jesus, my friend, does not come and invade your privacy. In this book, for the first time in humankind's history, we get a hold of what was happening in Saul of Tarsus' mind when he was in the road to Damascus to kill a man because he was following Jesus and disseminating his teachings. As much as he was troubled by that challenge in itself, deep in his soul, he was conflicted. Psychology explains conflict is an open door to many things. In this case, he was conflicted between the old man inside of him and the new man that was about to be born. Saul of Tarsus, traveling with a few friends in the road of Damascus, he is there. And suddenly, he falls. He falls from his transportation, and a whole new vision appears in his life. Let us listen to the excerpt and visualize this encounter that can be our very encounter with Jesus.
Saul's vision seems to have extended to the infinite. Another light bathes his dazzled eyes, and on the path which the rent atmosphere has unveiled to him, he sees the figure of a man of majestic beauty, giving the impression that he is coming down out of heaven to meet him. His robe is made of luminous points of light. His hair touches his shoulders in Nazarene fashion. His magnetic eyes, full of sympathy and love, illuminate a grave but gentle face, hallowed by divine sorrow. Saul of Tarsus contemplates him in profound wonder, and it is then, with the intonation of an unforgettable voice, that the unknown figure makes himself heard. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? The young man from Tarsus did not realize that instinctively he was on his knees, unable to grasp what was happening. He pressed his heart into a gesture of desperation. An irrepressible sentiment of adoration had overtaken him completely. What could this mean? Who was the divine figure he was beholding framed against the open firmament, and whose presence was flooding his heart with unknown emotions? While his traveling companions surrounded the kneeling man without seeing or hearing anything, despite having at first sensed a great light in the sky, Saul asked in a trembling and fearful voice, "Who are you, Lord?" Hallowed by a balsamic light, and in a tone of inconceivable tenderness, the Lord responded, "I am Jesus." It was then that the proud and unyielding doctor of the law bent to the ground in convulsive weeping. One could say that the passionate rabbi of Jerusalem had received a mortal blow, experiencing in a moment the destruction of all the principles that had formed his spirit and guided his life until then. Right there before his very eyes, here and now, was the magnanimous and misunderstood Christ. The preachers of the way had not been deluded after all. Stephen's words had been pure truth. Abigail's belief was the path of truth. That man was the Messiah. The marvelous story of his resurrection was not a fairy tale for the fortifying people's strength. The marvelous story of his resurrection was not a fairy tale for fortifying people's strength. Yes, he, Saul, was beholding him right there in the splendor of his divine glory. And what love could have animated his mercy-filled heart to come to meet him on the desert roads? To him, Saul, who had set himself up as the implacable persecutor of the most faithful disciples. In the sincerity of his ardent soul, he considered all this in one fleeting minute. He felt insuperable shame about his cruel past. A torrent of impetuous tears bathed his heart. He wanted to speak, to do penance, to protect his infinite illusions, to proclaim loyalty and dedication to the Messiah of Nazareth. But the sincere contrition of his repentant and lacerated spirit stifled his voice. That was when he noticed Jesus step forward, and contemplating him lovingly, the Master touched his shoulders tenderly and said in a fatherly voice, "Do not kick against the gourds." Saul understood. Ever since his first encounter with Stephen, great powers had been compelling him at every moment and everywhere to meditate on the new teachings. Christ had been calling him by every way and means. Unable to understand the divine grandeur of that moment, his traveling companions watched him as he wept even more copiously. The man from Tarsus sobbed. In light of the gentle and persuasive words of the Nazarene Messiah, he thought about the time he had wasted on harsh and barren roads. From now on, he would have to reform the patrimony of his innermost thoughts. The vision of the resurrected Jesus before his mortal eyes renewed his religious concepts completely. Certainly, the Savior had had mercy on the loyal and sincere heart that he had consecrated to the service of the law, and had descended from his glory to reach out his divine hands to him. Esau was the lost sheep on the crag of arid and destructive theories. Jesus was the friendly shepherd who deigned to close his eyes to the ungrateful briars in order to lovingly save him. In a flash, the young rabbi considered the extent of that gesture of love. The tears gushed from his embittered heart like pure lymph from the unknown fount. Right there in the august sanctuary of his spirit, he made a vow to give himself to Jesus forever. Suddenly he remembered his hard and grievous trials. The dream of a home had died with Abigail. He felt alone and ashamed. From now on, however, he would give himself to Christ as a humble slave of his love. He would make every effort to prove to him that he was able to understand his sacrifice, supporting him along the dark pathway of human inequities at the decisive instant of his destiny. Bathed in tears as never before, then and there, under the shocked stare of his companions, and in the burning midday heat, he made his first profession of faith. "Lord, what would you have me do?" That resolute soul, even in a trance of unconditional surrender, humiliated and wounded in its most esteemed principles, disclosed its nobility and loyalty. Finding the greater revelation in the light of the love that Jesus was showing him, Saul of Tarsus did not choose the endeavor in which he would serve him in the renewal of his efforts as a man. Giving himself body and soul as if he were a lowly servant, he asked with humility what the Master desired of his cooperation. Contemplating him more lovingly and enabling him to understand the need for people to work together for the common spiritual evolution of all in universal love, and in his name, Jesus said kindly, "Get up, Saul, go into the city, and there you will be told what to do." Then, amid the feelings of being immersed in a sea of darkness, the man from Tarsus no longer perceived the loving figure. In extreme exhaustion, he continued to weep, causing his companions to pity him. He rubbed his eyes as if he wished to tear off the veil that shrouded his sight, but he could only fumble in the midst of dense darkness.
Dear listener, as you can see, we can extrapolate a piece of each one of us there. Saul represents our rebelliousness, represents our pride and our selfishness, everything that we don't need any longer, especially at the new era. We are already at the dawn of the world of regeneration, and there is no need for that anymore. As we said in a program that was on Christmas Eve, the standards now are different. If we were paying 75 cents to go through the toll road, now we're going to pay $1. What does that mean? It means that we're going to be requested a higher level attitude, more spiritual, kinder, firmer, more perseverant, and more fraternal amongst all. All things, the most important thing is to be altruistic, because it's the opposite of pride and selfishness. It's simple, very simple. It's about prioritizing the needs of others instead of our own. It's prioritizing what others are in need instead of only our own. How many people have this encounter with the Master? You may be asking. Before we go there, because we're going to stream to you the very discourse of Emmanuel, when he tells that each one of us, we have already been called by the shepherd, by Jesus. How? How so? I don't remember it. Do you remember that? Well, that's the day for us to set new resolutions, as we recall it. But in this very dialogue that you listen to, we could go through in a much psychological analysis of each and every passage. Let us notice, first of all, Jesus does not invade your own privacy. When people think that Jesus appeared like a thundered in front of Saul, he didn't. He didn't do that, invading his privacy. Actually, he attuned with Christ mind to mind, because as Emmanuel describes, deep in his thoughts, in his heart, Saul was conflicted. He was almost there, and Jesus came to his rescue. So in our minds, dear listener, many people in our lives may be seeing something, but if in our minds we're behaving differently, that's what accounts for the connections we have with the spiritual realm. And Jesus came to his rescue, and he first and foremost asked, after a long conversation they had, mind to mind, heart to heart, when Jesus then clearly stated to Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Question to us, how do we persecute Jesus? Maybe we're not persecuting the man, but if we are trying in any way and means to put down the works of goodness in other people's lives, that's the way we're persecuting Jesus. We're crucifying Jesus again through the people in this world. If my boss at work is trying his best, and I by any chance, am always complaining and nagging, sending him mental darts that are destructive and hateful, I am persecuting Jesus, because each one of us on the earth belongs to the herd of the shepherd, Jesus Christ. We're persecuting him just like Saul. He was persecuting Ananias, hoping that he was going to put down the message of the Christ. And Jesus took it personal. Not that he is a bad person, and no, but he took it personal because Ananias, as much as Saul, belonged to his herd, and saying, why do you persecute me? You know, much like parents, when their children are fighting, they are fighting amongst themselves, and parents, they are so upset, they come and say, why are you doing this? Why do you destroy my peace and my harmony? Can't you leave me alone? And then they turn to the mother or the father and say, we're not doing anything against you. But that's how it is. It is personal. In this case, it's about a persecution of the divine inside of us. If I have a neighbor and I am sending mental thoughts that are destructive to him, to a relative, to somebody in an organization like a Spiritist Center, I am persecuting Jesus. There is no way that we'll find peace in that mode. But Saul was already feeling this repentance. He wasn't feeling right, as he said, I did my best, but I'm not finding the right pathway. And as Jesus is there, you see how kind he is. And he doesn't recognize fully the man. He asks this question, "Who are you, Lord?" He recognizes the stature of Jesus, but doesn't realize precisely who he is. What kind of question is this? If he said beforehand, "Why are you persecuting me, Saul?" Of course, it's almost second nature to know this is Jesus Christ. But he needed to confirm. Is that what's happening to us? Are we looking forward in the new year to confirm what the obvious already tells us? There is no other way but one way, which is the way of altruistic attitude, in which we rid ourselves little by little of pride and selfishness. So, are we still in need of recognizing who is in charge of our lives? Our own conscience. As question and answer of the Spirit's book 621, clearly, Allan Kardec asks where the laws of God are written, and the Spirits are quite straightforward when they said, in the conscience. It's not anywhere else. Our psychotherapist is not going to tell us what is right, what is wrong. Our friends won't either, because today they may be our friends. Tomorrow it may be all different. As Paul later in this book, you're going to get acquainted with it, he teaches us much about friendship. A friendship that is different from this human friendship, that is almost like childish and high school, we would say, when people just get along because they have the same interest. But what about our spiritual interest? We are talking about true friendship, one that aligns our hearts with God. And it's a beautiful passage when Saul is already transformed into Paul. He's already leading his life into his own self-transformation, his inner journey. And one of his best friends was traveling with him. And at this time, they didn't have many friends. But this one needed to bring his nephew back to his sister's house. And Saul said, "I'm sorry, Barnabas, we're not going to go back in any way it means. We still have our plan." And then Barnabas says to him, "Oh, but Paul, come on, we're friends." And Paul teaches us the difference between the human relationship, the human friendship that is in passing interests, and the one that is the spiritual friendship. He says, "Dear Barnabas, almost always friendship with God doesn't match the friendship amongst men. Because our goal is to lead ourselves to God. No wonder Jesus told us that oftentimes we need to travel a most lonely road when we decide to do what is right. Because people have their pace, they have their time. And that's the journey that Paul himself had to walk after this very encounter with the Master. What are we looking forward in the new year? To walk a pathway amongst many people who apparently just agree with us, or a pathway in which we know that those who are around are really leading the same journey to God? That's a question for us. Well, as soon as Jesus confirms, and you see he's not sarcastic, he's not playing, you see how Jesus is so kind, because the beauty of the description of Emmanuel tells us about the tone of voice Jesus used when talking to Saul. He was tender. The Jesus we learn in Spiritism is completely different from the Jesus we've ever heard on the earth. It's a Jesus of kindness and firmness. It's almost paradoxical, but it's a model for the future humanity. We're not quite there yet in this beautiful combination of noble and simple posture in life. And Jesus does not say anything, but confirms, I am Jesus. What if you were Jesus and you were not really there? What if I were there, but we're not really Jesus? I would probably say, come on, don't you know me? Don't you recognize me? And Jesus is not sarcastic, ironic, arrogant. He is tender and humble. He's not even making a point about himself. He just says, I am Jesus. It's as if somebody is blind and he cannot recognize a mother, says, who is there? And she kindly says, I'm your mom. I'm here. So he's just embracing little by little. And later on, one of the most important things, when he finally understands the call, then Emmanuel describes that Jesus steps forward. Another aha moment. Because Jesus then is coming closer when we open up. We need to open up. And he becomes ever more loving. And you know the description of Emmanuel says that the Master even touched the shoulders of Saul tenderly. You see, it's a message of caring. How often we talk to people in our lives and we don't even look at their face. We don't even extend a kind, tender gesture. And that's why our families are suffering. Because we need this type of tenderness. One that touches. One that respects. One that loves with words and beyond words. We have a whole workshop at spiritisnetwork.com that talks about educating without words. And Jesus then comes and in a fatherly voice says, do not kick against the goads. And what does that mean? Well, a goad is a spiked stick used for driving cattle. Let us remember that the figurative, the symbolic way in which Jesus talks is about a shepherd who is putting together the sheep that were astray. And they use this goad to bring them in. And if you are rebellious, you may be receiving these goads and you're still kicking it rebelliously. So Jesus' bottom line is just telling Saul, do not resist. And what did Jesus promise? That in this new era on the earth, who is going to inherit the earth? Because it's getting better, dear listener. We're going to bring in Kardec Radio, at Kardec Radio, a man who wrote a book in 2013, a show with an interview with the author of the book that talks about how Earth historically is getting better. He talks about facts on how life has changed socially and individually on the Earth. A book that was considered by Bill Clinton a best-selling book in 2012. Just wait and see, because the program is soon going to be disclosed at Kardec Radio's website. But for now, How many of us are still resisting and giving kicks to the very core? For example, when people in our lives say, hey, can you come here and have a meal with me? And they say, no, I don't have time. Or when a relative needs us to talk, or in our relationship, be it marriage, be it dating, or simply a friendship, and people don't have time for one another. They're resisting this encounter of the divine inside of each one of us. It's about surrendering to be meek and to be peacemaker, something that we're yet to understand. And finally, when we ask, what do we do? Paul, when he was still Saul, he asked this question, what do we do? What do I do now that I surrender? And you may be asking, what do I do in the new year? I now know, I now surrender. I want to stay in this pathway that is joyful, that is kind, that is hopeful, but I don't know where to start. And Jesus simply says, in a psychological analysis of his own words, and forgive us if we are being too limited. You may have another point of view, and you're welcome to share with us at blogtalkradio.com/Kardec Radio Chat Room, or at calling us at 858-769-4705, or emailing us at kardecradio@gmail.com. But this is one of the ways we could interpret Jesus' words when he said, get up, Saul. Get up, Saul. Saying, by staying there in repentance, feeling sorry about ourselves, we don't move to another level. If we really want another level, stand up and move. That's exactly what Jesus is telling us. He's telling us now, in 2013, get up, meaning heads up, look at the future, present and future. The past is gone. There's no way to go back, because who amongst us has never, ever committed any wrong? And he says, go into the city and there you'll be told what to do. What does this represent? Go into the city. City is a place where other people live, of liveliness, meaning get out of your own little world and go be amongst people in the world. Much like that woman in the book, one of the amazing books psychographed by Chico Xavier as well, the spirit author Humberto de Campos clearly told the story of a woman who loved Jesus very much. She prayed day and night and day. She decided not to get married to anyone, just to pray and fast. She would read the scriptures, pray, fast. She didn't care about material possessions, so she had a lot of qualities already there. And she lived on the second floor of a facility. Downstairs, she often heard the voices of people coming around and passing by. She never cared. She prayed her whole life, and when her hair turned gray, suddenly, as she prayed by the window, she saw a star coming nearer, closer, and closer to her. When she saw that star took the form of a human body, it was Jesus, but he didn't enter her apartment. He actually stepped downstairs, 2 blocks downstairs. She couldn't understand. She was amazed by the vision, but she was disappointed that he didn't stop by at her apartment. She ran downstairs quickly and met Jesus. She knelt down and said, Master, I want to serve you. I want to be your slave. Please tell me what to do. Like many of us are asking. I know, I surrender. I'm tired of suffering. What do I have to do? And he kindly said to her, okay, stay here. Because in a few, a woman holding a baby, this baby will be one of the people who will disseminate my gospel. You will almost not recognize them because they are anonymous people, but they need help. You give them help, food, shelter, and comfort, and that's the way you're going to be with me. She didn't hesitate. She stayed there and he disappeared. Soon after, this woman came along, and there she was. She felt such joy inside of her heart that every day, instead of praying longly, she would pray more shortly and go downstairs and help others. And she would always see Jesus nearby, smiling at her. Because at that moment she learned that when she is being altruistic, when she's doing good to others, she's closer to Jesus. And that's exactly what it means going to the city. Go where you need to be. Don't stay stuck in your small world. The gospel of Jesus really is a message that we need to understand more deeply. And we are very happy to announce in this very program of Kardec Radio today that starting today, we have a new collaborator, the friend Luis Sergio Maroda from Brazil, who is kindly producing segments about the very gospel of Jesus Christ according to Spiritism. Let us listen to this first segment that he put together for the audience of Kardec Radio to wrap up the thoughts about the message of Christ as an invitation to our hearts.
There must be war. God wills it!
Wars, fights, genocides, prejudice, and hatred. That's a great deal of what we have seen in the past centuries in history. By hearing these dark words, one can infer that they have been inspired by a great dictator or warrior. But for many, in fact, they really have been inspired by Jesus Christ himself. How come so much evil could have been inspired by someone who entitled himself the Son of God, and as many call him, the Prince of Peace? A French citizen, Allan Kardec, from the 19th century, by putting together his observation work on the communication with the so-called dead, the spirits, gave rise to some outstanding explanations of the gospel, so we can start to understand why things have turned out so bad. Let's listen to his words on the very first pages of a masterpiece book called The Gospel According to Spiritism. The gospel can be divided into 5 parts: the events in the life of Christ, the miracles, the prophecies, the works taken by the Roman Church on which they based their dogmas, and the moral teachings. The first 4 have been the object of controversies, but the last, the moral teaching, however, has remained constantly inviolate. Before this divine code, even incredulity bows down. This is the common ground where all cults may be united, the flag under which all may gather, whatever their creeds may be, because it has never been a matter of religious dispute, which always and in all places has originated from dogmatism. Moreover, if it had been discussed, then all cults would have found their own condemnation within it, seeing that in the majority they have held onto the more mythical rather than the moral part, which demands an intimate reform from each one. Specially prepared for mankind, It constitutes a code of rules on how to behave in every circumstance of private and public life, and offers the basic principles for all social relations, founded on rigid justice. It is finally, and above all, the infallible route to lasting happiness and the uplifting of a corner of the veil that hides the future life. That's what forms the exclusive objective of this work. Well, what does Allan Kardec really mean when he says we have to stick to the moral teachings, as we say today? Actually, if we pay attention to the moral teachings of the Gospel, although we may belong to this or that group of people who gathered around the Bible under the influence of culture, habits, language, or other reasons, if we take seriously on account what the Master meant by saying, love God above all things and your neighbor as yourself, we'll definitely come to a conclusion that no dogma, no principles can be more important than that. Those responsible for what happened to Jesus Christ at the end of his stay with us did what they did in the name of doctrines and principles that in some ways were, in their minds, beyond the first and most important law, the law of love. To those religious people that tried to tease Jesus, the Master, used to say something like, you Pharisees, in order to accomplish minor laws, you go against other fundamental laws. Jesus was surrounded by all kinds of people with difficulties in their lives, the sick, the poor, prostitutes, and we have no news of any condemnation towards them. As for the religious people around him, the Pharisees, for example, he gave quite a number of warnings to make them feel that the essence of his teachings was love. That's why in Spiritism, there's no salvation out of love or charity. As put by Jesus in the parable of the Samaritan. At the very end of the parable, he says, do the same. Help people. You may ask us, how? I'm not used to helping people. But let's begin step by step. Jesus has never asked us to be holy overnight. And there's a spirit, his name is Emmanuel, who usually says something very interesting and something very obvious. Discipline precedes spontaneity. We will have to make an effort to try to find other ways and build other culture inside us. Let's try it. We have a lot of understanding now. We have a lot of help. Praying, doing good, and studying. Music, Delicate.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Kardec Radio, live, every Saturday at 11 a.m.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
A new great book and tool for kids and educators. The children's book, Our Father by the Spirit Mei, psychographed by Chico Xavier, is available for purchase at www.edisayofamerica.com. Buy your copy today.
Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
The newest edition of the Medium's book by Allan Kardec is now available. Purchase your copy online or via your ebook reader. Simply go to www.edicofamerica.com today.
Nourish your soul with Kardec Radio.
Spiritism for Everyone, the online study of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel according to Spiritism. Spiritism for Everyone meets every Wednesday evening and Saturday morning using the latest technology in web conferencing. You can join in from any computer in the comfort of your home or office, no matter where you are in the U.S. or the world. Spiritism for Everyone is open, free, and requires no registration. To access the web live meetings, go to www.edicofamerica.com. www.spiritus.us. Spiritism for Everyone is a program of the United States Spiritist Council.
And now we return to our program.
We are here talking about the importance of recalibrating our system for the new year. That's the word we would say, recalibrating. Because as Spiritism explains, before we reincarnated, there was a plan for us to fulfill in this life. Question: do you know the plan? If you don't, how will you know? Well, as in the Gospel according to Spiritism, and many of the books by Allan Kardec and other spirits, inside of our conscience, we have pretty much the feeling, the tendencies. It's like that gut feeling about what is right and what is wrong. And we would like to share with you, dear listener, because it's most important that we recalibrate to our true plan. Because most often, people in our lives are going to tell, oh, you're working too much for others. You should work more for yourself. It's a very common statement nowadays. When people think that it's more important to take care of themselves than to reaching out to others. And this is the opposite of what we have planned before we reincarnated. How many reincarnations have we spent only feeding our ego? It's this one, when Spiritism comes to our rescue, that we need to make a difference. For our own sake. Several of the books, for example, The Messengers by the spirit author André Luiz through Chico Xavier, which, by the way, you can buy through the website of eddyseeofamerica.com. He is going to tell us about cases after cases after cases of people who had a plan and they forgot about the plan. It doesn't matter much if you lose track of it, but then you go back, rail back in. The problem is if you lose yourself for the rest of your life. Make mistakes, we all do. Like Paul, question: don't we know that before that reincarnation, Saul was prepared to do what he had to do? Oh yes, no doubt about it. How come he didn't recognize Jesus? How come he didn't recognize his companion, Stephen, when he met him at first in the Church of the Way? How many of us meet one another in our daily lives, and instead of embracing in a teamwork fashion, we just push each other away because we want to be the center stage wherever we are? Sometimes in our own family. Sometimes we push away the very people we should love the most. And I tell you a true story that Chico Xavier once told Ramiro Gama, a great friend of Chico Xavier. It's reported in the book that is not in English yet, but for those who understand Portuguese, you can get a hold of it in the internet. Lindos Casos de Chico Xavier. There he reports the case of a man who, unfortunately, was suffering in this life. In a previous life, he was the owner of slaves at a time in which in Brazil, slavery was still legal. And people were just discussing about freeing the slaves. And when he got a hold of it, that slave master, he didn't agree upon it. He thought, slaves were his possession. And he went to a certain location and asked, who is starting this fire, this conversation about freeing the slaves in our region? It was when he was deeply astonished to know that the very man who was promoting the dissemination on the freeing of the slaves was his main friend and his number one slave. A slave whom he held dear to his heart was his best friend. He couldn't believe. He was so outraged. He couldn't believe he wanted to be free. He didn't understand that it was possible to be free, but to be an employee like we know nowadays. But he couldn't understand it. He thought he was deeply insulted by feeling that he was being rejected. And in his pride, he went back to his farm and asked to arrest that man. That man who was like Stephen for Paul. Freeing him from his own prejudice, but he couldn't. He resisted. He was telling him what he needed to do. He didn't accept. Well, this close friend and slave accepted to be arrested with calmness, quietly. And then he became more infuriated with his slave because of his calmness, of his submission to it. So he asked to whip him out of the map of life. He died. Soon after this passage, he also discarnated, the slave master himself. He was rescued by the very man whom he got rid of in our life. That slave, that best friend, whom he couldn't understand that he was freeing not only himself, but freeing his own slave master. And it was when, in the afterlife, he got to know that the very slave who was close friends with him in a previous life was his own father. Dear listener, how many people in our lives, they are not in our blood ties, and they may have been in a previous life, a close relative, a family member, sometimes our employee, sometimes our students, sometimes our neighbors, sometimes the people in our spiritist centers. And instead of embracing them, supporting them, helping, we push them away. We stone them to death, sometimes a moral death. Maybe today, in this life, we don't kill anybody physically. But as Chico Xavier says, there are mental gunshots. As we reported in the recent issue of the Spiritist magazine, issue 20, it talks about many things, and in our editorial, we report the very case of a mental gunshot that was received by Chico Xavier by somebody who sent him a hateful thought, and it made his shoulder hurt for days, in spite of the spiritual shielding that he received. How many of us are suffering today because others are simply stoning us to death? We hope we are not one of these people. One thing we know, Saul himself had a plan. A plan he didn't understand. He was engaged to the sweet and kind Abigail, whose brother was Stephen. It's a most dramatic story. It's a beautiful novel. The way it is portrayed by Emmanuel, it really makes us see as a Hollywood movie. And it will certainly be the best movie humanity will see of all times. And there we're going to listen right now the encounter of Saul when he is now surrendered but despised by everybody. He couldn't take the easy way. He took the hard way in life. Now Abigail and Stephen are in the spiritual realm. They are physically dead, but living in the spiritual realm. They come to his rescue. Like for many of us, when life is really pushing hard on us, we're not alone. And we are going to listen in this very dialogue that if in 2013 you go through a tough time, here is a message never to forget, something that sets the tone for the new year. Even though people may be despising, criticizing, pushing you away, like they did to Saul when he embraced his own program, Abigail comes to his rescue together with Stephen, setting the tone of what to do and how to do in life. Let us listen and rejoice.
Saul had barely awakened from this rapture when he was taken by a new surprise of someone walking softly towards him. In a few more instants, he saw Stephen and Abigail in front of him, young and beautiful, dressed in garments so white and radiant that they looked more like shrouds of translucent snow. Incapable of expressing the sacred emotion engulfing his soul, Saul of Tarsus knelt and began to weep. Brother and sister, who had returned to encourage him, drew nearer, smiling broadly. "Get up, Saul," said Stephen with profound kindness.
"What is this? You weep? Would you feel so discouraged when your task has just begun?"
Now back on his feet, Saul wept convulsively. Those tears were not only the relief of a heart forsaken by the world, they expressed boundless joy and immense gratitude to Jesus, always lavish with his watch care and benevolence. He wanted to kiss Stephen's hands, to beg for forgiveness for the tragic past, but it was the martyr of the way who, in light of his glorious resurrection, embraced the former rabbi effusively, as if Saul were a beloved brother. After kissing his brow, he whispered tenderly, "Saul, do not stay stuck in the past. Who in the world is exempt from wrongdoings? Only Jesus was sinless." Gamaliel's former disciple felt immersed in a veritable sea of bliss. He wanted to speak of his boundless joy, to give thanks for such a gift, but uncontrollable emotion sealed his lips and confronted his soul. Aided by Stephen, smiling at him in silence, he saw Abigail, more beautiful than ever, reminding him of the spring flowers at the humble house on the road to Joppa. He could not escape his thoughts as a man or forget his shattered dreams, remembering them above all at that glorious moment of his life. He thought of the home he might have had, the tenderness with which the young woman from Corinth would have taken care of their dear children, the irreplaceable love that her devotion could have given him. But understanding his innermost thoughts, his spirit betrothed took his right hand, calloused by the hard labor in the desert, and spoke to him movingly.
"We shall never lack a home. Our home shall be in the hearts of all those who come our way. As for our children, we have the immense family that Jesus has bequeathed us in his mercy. The children of the Calvary are our children too. They are everywhere, awaiting their inheritance from the Savior."
Saul understood the loving admonishment and stored it in the core of his heart.
"Do not hand yourself over to disheartenment. Our ancestors knew the God of armies, of bloody triumphs, the gold and the silver of this world. We, however, know the Father who is the Lord of our hearts. The law accentuated our faith by the wealth of material gifts and sacrifices, but the gospel knows us by our inexhaustible trust and active faith in the service of the Almighty. You must be faithful to God, Saul. Even if the whole world were to turn against you, you would still have the boundless treasure of a faithful heart. The triumphant peace of Christ lies in the industrious soul that obeys and trusts in Him. Do not refuse to accept great suffering. Empty your mind of worldly thoughts. Once you have exhausted the last drop of the Posca of earthly disappointments, Jesus will fill your spirit with light immortal.
Experiencing infinite consolation, Saul was vexed at not being unable to utter a word. Abigail's exhortations would be with him forever. Never again would he allow discouragement to overwhelm him. An enormous hope now filled his soul. He would work for Christ everywhere and in all circumstances. The Master had sacrificed himself for all humankind. To dedicate his life to him represented a noble duty. While he was formulating these thoughts, he remembered the difficulty he had in getting along with other people. He would encounter struggle. He remembered Jesus' promise that he would be present wherever there were brethren gathered in his name. However, everything seemed suddenly difficult in this quick intellectual analysis. The synagogues were fighting amongst themselves. The Church of Jerusalem itself was once more leaning towards Judaizing influences. Abigail again answered his innermost appeals with infinite tenderness.
You ask for people who are in agreement with you in the construction of the gospel. You must remember, however, that even Jesus did not have them. The apostles could not concur with the Master except with help from heaven after the resurrection and Pentecost. Those most beloved to him slept as he prayed in agony in the garden. Some denied him. Others fled at the decisive hour. Be in agreement with Jesus only and work. The way to God is subdivided into a veritable infinity of planes. The Spirit will pass alone from one realm to the next. All spiritual evolution is difficult, but only thereby we will find true victory. Remember the narrow door of the gospel lesson and press on. When the time is right, Jesus will call to your endeavors those who can concur with you in his name. Dedicate every moment of your life to the Master. Serve him with energy and tenderness, as someone who knows that spiritual accomplishments demand the concourse of all the sentiments that ennoble the soul.
Saul was in ecstasy. He could not express the feelings of love, and his heart overcome with ineffable bliss. New hopes blossomed in his soul. A radiant future was unfolding before the eyes of his spirit. He wanted to move, to give thanks for this sublime gift, but his emotions deprived him of any expression of affection. One big question, however, still hovered in his mind. What to do from here on out to triumph? How to fulfill the sacred notions that fell to him to put into practice, without taking note of the sacrifices involved. Letting him perceive that she heard his innermost questions, Abigail offered lovingly,
Saul, to be sure of victory on the difficult pathway, remember that it is necessary to give. Jesus gave everything he had to the world, and above all, he gave us the intuitive understanding of our own weaknesses in order for us to tolerate human miseries.
The young Tarson noticed that at this point Stephen was bidding him goodbye, casting a paternal look in his direction. Abigail in turn held his hands tighter with immense tenderness. The former rabbi wanted to prolong the beautiful vision for the rest of his life, to be with her forever, but the cherished spirit displayed a gesture of affectionate farewell. Saul then made an effort to hurriedly list all his spiritual needs, desirous to hear her on the problems facing him. Anxious to make the most of the smallest fragment of the glorious, fleeting minute, Saul mentally arrayed a large number of questions. What could he do to acquire a perfect understanding of Christ's designs?
Love,
answered Abigail spontaneously. But how could he proceed in order to grow richer in divine virtues? Jesus ordered us to love even our enemies. He realized, however, how difficult it would be to do that. It was difficult to practice devotion without others' real comprehension. What could he do for his soul to reach such an elevated expression of the effort in Jesus Christ?
Work,
explained his beloved, smiling kindly. Abigail was right. It was necessary to work for inner progress. He ardently desired to do so. For this reason, he had isolated himself in the desert for more than 1,000 days. However, upon returning to the environment of collective effort at the side of former friends, he had nourished blossoming hopes that soon turned into heartbreaking bewilderment. What measures could he adopt against such destructive discouragement?
Hope nonetheless.
She said further, in a gesture of tender solicitude, like someone who wished to clarify that the soul must be ready to attend to the divine plan in any circumstance, regardless of any personal whims. As he listened to her, Saul remembered that hope had always been with him in his most difficult days. He would know how to hope in the future with the blessings of the Most High. He would trust in his mercy. He would not disdain the opportunity for redemptive service. But what about other people? Everywhere, confusion flourished in their spirits. He, in fact, realized that overall agreement regarding the teachings of the Divine Master represented one of the most difficult tasks besetting the unfolding of the gospel. But more than that, people also seemed uninterested in the truth or enlightenment. The Jews were clinging to the law of Moses, intensifying the system of Pharisaic hypocrisy. The followers of the way were getting closer to the synagogues, avoiding the Gentiles and submitting strictly to the practice of circumcision. Where was the freedom in Christ? Where was the endless hope that his love had brought to all humankind without excluding the children of other peoples? He agreed that loving, working, and hoping were indispensable. But how was he to behave among such diverse forces? How was he to reconcile the grand lessons of the gospel with human indifference? Abigail squeezed his hands, and even more tenderly, to show that she was saying goodbye, and emphasized gently,
"Forgive."
Then her shining figure seemed to dissolve as if made from fragments of sunshine. Enraptured by this marvelous revelation, Saul was now alone without knowing how to come to grips with his own wonderment. In that region crowned with infinite brightness, he had felt vibrations of mysterious beauty. From far away, the echoes of sublime, sidereal harmonies continued to reach his ears, seemingly bringing messages of love originating on distant suns. Saul knelt and prayed. He thanked the Lord for the wonder of his blessings. Within moments, as if an imponderable power had returned him to the earthly realm, he felt himself back on his impoverished rustic bed among the rocks. Incapable of explaining the prodigious phenomena, Saul of Tarsus gazed up at the heavens enraptured.
Dear listener, it's a most beautiful passage for sure. It's a passage that can be a reference for us in this year of 2013 and forever. As one of the people closest to Chico Xavier said, in this book, Paul and Stephen, we find a true manual for ourselves as a person, as an individual, and also for Spiritist practitioners. In this very dialogue, in this conversation, beginning from Stephen himself, and let us recall, Stephen, before he had to change his name not to be found out by others that he was kindly freed by a Roman patrician, he was before Jeziel. And Jeziel, in the first chapters, portrayed by Emmanuel as the son of Joshadab and the brother of Abigail. We see that he had a good foundation in his childhood. As our dear Bernadette Leal in every program teaches us how to teach our children about Spiritism. It's of the essence to do so, because neuroscience shows the brain is more susceptible to receive new input, something that Spiritism told us all along since 1857, when education couldn't see that pathway. But at the vanguard of human science, Spiritism was already saying the first years of life are imperative to set the tone for the rest of our lives. Thus, Jeziel, or Stephen, he is a man who is meek. He is sweet. He is a peacemaker. When his father comes troubled to his house, he says to his father, "Father, take heart. Our God is just and wise. Let us trust in his protection." How often we're troubled and how little, or how not too often, we think about this. Jeziel was a man that was connected to the scriptures because his mother taught him so. And here's a call for all mothers in this world. Dear listener, we don't want to judge, but we know that the crisis we are experiencing today is, as Chico Xavier has said, we women need to step up and be the center of the spiritual home in each and every home. We can't run away from our duty. And no wonder children, teenagers are so troubled nowadays, because we are forgetting the most important part of our role, which is the education of our children. And women are especially in charge of it. Men are as well, but they are born through women, and women are the ones that need to step up and bring spirituality to the children's hearts. This is not a sexist comment. It's a comment about revisiting the roles of men and women on the earth today. The shootings that we have seen 2 weeks ago, it's all about the messed up role in our society. Women are to bring spirituality, kindness. They are not here to teach their children to shoot anything, anyone, any living being. It's a moment for reflection. Abigail and Stephen come to teach Saul to tame his heart, to domesticate his soul, to put down his aggressiveness, his pride, his selfishness, and she lays out the program that can save a whole reincarnation by telling us love, work, hope, and forgive. Let us recall when we talked about the importance of being kind to one another. Luis Sergio shared with us at the chat room a passage from John 4, verse 2. This is the first book of John. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar. For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And Bernadette Leal, earlier in the program, she also talked about a passage in Matthew 25:40. I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. This is about loving God through loving one another. And this is the first recommendation that Abigail, it's the maternal, the feminine inside of all of us. As a psychologist, we can go through, it's like a psychological digression here. Why Abigail is the one that comes and reinforces the program for him. Not only because she is the one closer to Saul's heart, but because it is the feminine inside of us speaking up and telling us, tame your heart, cool down, domesticate it. And love is the first thing to do. Love, thinking that we're not more, neither less than anybody in this world. And she tells work. We need to work. But not work that blames others. You know, we see many people on Facebook today wasting their time criticizing the government, wherever they are, whether in the United States or in Brazil or wherever they are in the world. Tell you the truth, that is not a spiritist attitude. Chico Xavier, in a program named Pinga Fogo, he told quite clearly, no matter what the government does, we need to pray. By criticizing, we're not helping. Instead, we're reinforcing. If you go to the books by André Luiz, he shows how a judgmental nature just pushes people to the abyss of wrongdoing instead of helping them out. So criticizing is not going to help. Instead, we should work. And prayer is work. Work is prayer. Hope. Even though we may not see the unfoldment, I tell you, yesterday we saw people we're talking about gun control here, and we were nearby a place where there was an expo, and people were lining up blocks and blocks to buy new guns. Really? Really. And then we say we want peace. It's not the way to go. So we pray, and we hope that sooner than later, we're going to wake up and see that there is no need for a gun at home. There is no need for us to prepare to kill anybody, because the lives of others are not our own, not even ours. It's God's. We haven't asked to exist. We have asked to reincarnate, but we haven't asked to exist, and God did it, so our lives are not ours. Our lives are God's. And that's the reason why when things go really wild and crazy, Abigail recommends to Saul, whenever things go wild, forgive. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. Because we're going to make mistakes as well. And we need to learn to forgive ourselves. It's a difficult journey. And, you know, we go back then at the beginning of their encounter when Stephen himself says, get up, Saul. Say, man, don't stay there ashamed of your wrongdoings. Stand up, walk tall. And he says, do not stay stuck in the past, Saul. Who in the world is exempt from wrongdoings? Only Jesus was sinless. And this is something we want to remind especially spiritists, who sometimes, forget that they themselves have wrongdoings. Only Jesus was perfect, and he didn't condemn anyone. So question, in 2013, do we want to condemn and judge anyone? We talk so much about obsession, but we are almost amazed about how people behave before obsessed people. They take it as if they had leper, and they say, oh, stay away from that person who is obsessed. And that is not charity. Because the ultimate charity comes in the form of non-judgmental, caring, kind, altruistic outreach. And this is the story of Saul himself. We want to transform ourselves and lead this pathway of work in inner progress as Abigail's worked. If you want, you can go to Spiritist Network and go through the explanation of each and every chapter that we have for this book, Paul and Stephen, or a talk we gave on the path of inner discovery by Paul himself. It's quite interesting because people think that we shift like Paul. Oh, he shifted and boom, he got it right. No, when we read Emmanuel's account, we're going to see it's not an easy road. First, it takes that moment when we get out of the conflict and shift. When Dyer talks about the importance of that moment of shift. But the shift is not everything. After that shift, there's a long journey. A journey that Saul himself had to walk. spending more than 1,000 days, 3 years in the desert. What is the desert? The desert is the dry soil of our old selves because we still identify we lack the water of love. How often we want to change and it's hard. People come to spiritist centers and they say, man, I came here, love this message, but since then, I feel guiltier. Well, you feel guiltier because now you're getting to know of yourself, but get rid of guilt because it's going to change. The dry lands of your heart, little by little, are receiving water of love, of the message of love. But it wasn't enough to face this dryness inside of us as Saul did for 3 years. He had to spend another 3 years isolated from the world because people didn't understand him. How many people, when they choose the right pathway, they feel lonely. They feel so lonely. And it's supposed to be that way. Emmanuel, in another book, through Chico Xavier, the book's not translated yet. In Portuguese, it's entitled Roteiro. In that book, he talks about this individual experience that we live. It's entitled Individualism. He says, when we really get it right, we feel lonely, and it's supposed to be that way because it's our own journey. And he had to go deeper in his self-discovery, in the darkness of our own cave for 3 years. That's what happened to Saul, and it's going to happen to us sooner or later. We can't postpone it. But soon after, as we go deep in the darkness of our own ignorance, we bounce back up to life and to joy, because after those dry and dark years of Saul, he bounces back to the surface of the luminous life when he is able to serve. As Abigail told him, hope, because sooner or later Jesus is going to tell you what to do. So many people are there. They come to Spiritist and they knock and say, I want to learn mediumship. I want to do this. I want to do that. Hold on. Have you gone through the pathway? Hold on. We are a team. Little by little, you will fit in. Take your time. Be patient, because patience is something that is imperative for us to work in society. And finally, he finds his pathway in altruistic behavior. As he learned from Abigail, Jesus gave everything he had, and this is the call for 2013, dear listener. We need to give everything we have. Let's give a break. When we come back, it's the climax of our program when you're going to listen Emmanuel's take on how Jesus is calling each one of us.
We will return to our program after these messages.
For the first time ever, the book Between Heaven and Earth by the Spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier, is now in English. This is a novel that offers information about the relationship that exists in the activities of the Spirit on the two planes of life. Purchase your copy today at www.edysayofamerica.com.
Nourish Your Soul with Kardec Radio.
Now in English, the book Action and Reaction by the Spirit André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier. Buy your copy online or via your ebook reader. Go to www.edysayofamerica.com today. The International Spiritist Council is organizing and promoting the 7th World Spiritist Congress, which will be held in Havana, Cuba on March 23rd through the 25th of 2013. The Congress theme will be Charity and Spiritual Education in Building a World of Peace. 150 years of the Gospel according to Spiritism. For more information, please visit www.7cem.org.
And now we return to our program.
Dear listener, now it's about the ultimate call when Jesus is calling us. Do you believe it? Do you believe in this new year we're going to be called day in, day out to join the herd of Jesus? Not about religious engagement. It's not about that. It's not about a sectarian mindset. It's about the Jesus that brings God consciousness. As Deepak Chopra often says, Jesus came to bring the ultimate awareness of God. Because everywhere he came, he told, I came here because God sent me. God is doing this through me. He never said it was him. This is the example of humility and simplicity. He never complicated. Sometimes we want to help others, dear listener. And you know, it's funny because we want to fancy it up. Even at Kardec Radio, tell you the truth, we always need help. And we are very thankful for all Kardec Radio team, for all that they do and they help. But we need more help. And sometimes we are short in help. No matter how many people help, we'll always need more help to make it better and better. But you know, the spirit mentors of Kardec Radio often say, Vanessa, simplicity. Simplicity is the best route. Jesus didn't come at a time when we had Hollywood screens, podiums, etc. And he came to us, telling us, you don't need any of this to reach out to anybody. And we have a lot more to reach out to people. And sometimes we don't do because we are just like that woman that Brother X tells us in one of his books. He says in the book, in one of his books, Pontos e Contos, it's not in English, and we ask for your forgiveness because the publisher will make it available soon. 412 books. It's going to take time, and we need your help. Contact the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, the International Spiritist Council to see how you can help with donations. You can help so they can pay professional translators. You can also help them translate here for professional, etc. But we want to share with you a case in which this lady, she had a lot of money. She became a spiritist. She got married. They were both spiritists. And they couldn't conceive a child. Well, she got to know that she couldn't conceive a child, so then they decided to create a foundation to reach out to kids who were abandoned. She started putting it all together, but in her mind, vanity took the lead, and she started thinking about this great project. So she accepted 20 kids, helping them out, but started turning down all the other kids because she said, you know, now we can't spend the money on new kids, we have to expand the facility. It's like about this great projects in mind. And the years passed by, and one day, in a mediumistic meeting, she asks the mentors through a medium, how are we doing in this life? And they said, well, my dear, you could do better because you're helping 20 kids. But the plan here before you reincarnated was to help 80 kids. But by now, many of them are already in jail, addicted, overdosed, etc. So you still have time. When you leave here, accept, admit all these children. Don't worry about great projects. Just help them out. How many of us are not doing what we have to do because we're thinking about the day I talk to Steven Spielberg about my great ideas, then I'll make them come true. It's not going to happen that way. It's simple and it's on-spot altruistic behavior. Wherever we are, even in a party, maybe you're going to celebrate New Year's Eve amongst many people. There you can serve. Our dear friend George Godinho Neri, he taught us how to serve even in the most mundane times, teaching us that through prayer we can reach out to one another. It's very moving for us because it's the ultimate Christ consciousness. It's not about retreating to a convent, to a monastery. It's about living in the world without being of the world. So let us listen to the call that Emmanuel brings to us in the preface of the book, Paul and Stephen.
The fact is that the unforgettable weaver and tent maker did indeed have his own divine ministry. But who in this world does not have a ministry from God? Many will say they do not know what their particular calling is, that they are ignorant in this respect. However, we will answer that. Besides ignorance, there is neglect and much pernicious caprice. Those who are more exacting will remark that Paul received a direct call from God. But in reality, all ordinary men and women have been personally called to serve Christ. The form may vary, but the essence of the summons is always the same. The call to the ministry sometimes arrives subtly, unexpectedly. Most people, however, are resistant to the Lord's generous invitation. Very well, Jesus is not a master of forceful means, and if the figure of Paul appears to be greater in our eyes, it is because he hearkened to the call, repented, denied himself, took up his cross, and followed Christ to the end of his work on the earth. Amid persecution, infirmities, derision, mockery, disillusionment, desertions, stonings, beatings, and imprisonment, Paul of Tarsus was a courageous and sincere man, walking in the darkness of the world to meet the Master who made himself heard at the crossroads of his life. Paul was much more than a predestined individual. He was an accomplisher who strived daily to reach the light. The Master calls him from his realm of immortal radiance. Paul fumbles in the darkness of human experience and replies, "Lord, what would you have me do?" Between Jesus and him, there was an abyss which the apostle crossed over in the decades of ongoing redemptive struggle.
Dear listener, it's about our own call. It's about who in this world does not have a ministry from God. Ministry from God is not only being at a church or a spiritist center or a temple or a synagogue. It's about caring for those around in our lives, sometimes a boss that needs somebody who is understanding. Sometimes a colleague at work that does not gossip about them. Sometimes a neighbor that prays for them. Sometimes this ministry of God is about being a great mother, a great father, a great grandmother, grandfather, a great teacher, a great politician. And we say great in the spiritual sense of the world, not in the mundane sense of the world. But as Emmanuel says, many will say that they do not know what their particular calling is and that they are ignorant in that respect. How many of us say, I don't know what is lying ahead for me in 2013 and in the rest of my life? And Emmanuel is going to say, well, either you are ignoring it because you neglect or because you are simply working around your caprice. It's about our own whims. Bottom line, we're a spoiled child. Really? Do we need to go there? Do we need to stay there? Stay there in this neglect? And you may be asking then, how does this call come along? And he's going to say, well, in reality, all ordinary men and women have been personally called to serve Christ. Personally called to serve Christ. To serve in our daily lives. And this invitation may come, as he says, in different forms, but the message is the same. So, if you look at Chico Xavier, you never heard that, somebody came to him and said, now Chico Xavier, you're going to be the great medium, the best medium in Spiritism for many centuries to come. You're going to psychograph 400 plus books. No, that's not how it happens. It's like crumbs of light that come little by little, if we want, if we are open. But the call is there. It's like somebody saying, hey, come here. And you're like, what? Somebody's calling me? And it's right there in front of us. And the forms may vary. If you hear like Divaldo Franco, the way he turned his reincarnation into this luminous pathway, the Spiritist movement in the world would not be the same without Divaldo Franco as well. The books would not do the service alone. Without his amazing charitable work through his talks, the international movement would not be the same. And if you talk about Gandhi himself, he felt that call at the train when he was pushed away due to discrimination. It was a wake-up call. Then he understood what he had to do. He was putting a lot at stake, his own life, by the way, but he didn't hesitate. Does he regret it? We doubt. For example, Lincoln himself, the way in which he had bipolar disorder, depression, he did. There are books that talk about it. He fought with himself, but he put a stand during his government that was a humane government in which slavery was over. It was a lot at stake, including his own life. Does he regret it? No, because the Spiritist magazine, in issues ago, in 2009, we dedicated a whole article describing about the discarnation of Lincoln and how he never regretted it and even came to the rescue of John Booth, his own murderer. Fascinating. A man who really found his pathway in his life. So, what is the way in which we are being called in 2013? We don't know. Maybe we know. What about others in our lives? The call to the ministry sometimes arrives subtly, unexpectedly. So it's like George Godinho always told us, be prepared, because when the horse comes along, you need to be ready to jump and ride it. And that's all that it is about. Be ready. It's like when the mentors told us, create Kardec Radio. It was a Monday evening, coming from the spiritual side of Baltimore, and we were riding, and came that message, when you get home, you do it. If we had hesitated, dear listener, we wouldn't be here. If you had hesitated to do the journey, to be here with us today, you wouldn't be here. It takes that moment in which somebody tells us, just give bread to that person. You don't ask why. Because it's a good saying. You just do it. You do it. And later we'll know the reasons why. But we have to do. But he says most people are resistant to the Lord's generous invitation. Can you imagine being called to a generous banquet and refusing to attend it? In 2013, we want to be at that banquet. The banquet of love and light with our Master, the Governor, the friend, the brother, the doctor, Jesus. We want to be there. In this new year, dear listener, it's all about giving everything we have. Everything without restriction. That's the only pathway. Let us listen to this beautiful way in which Margot Magalhães and Joyce Magalhães tell us about the new year with doing good, altruistic heart and mind.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listener. Welcome to the segment Spiritism in Your Life. All of us, at any point of our lives, are going to face difficulties, feel sad or depressed, and we always wonder, is there anything I can do that I can alleviate my suffering, or something that will help me go through these difficulties? And we've been talking about this for the last few weekends, and today we're going to bring you a very nice recipe for you not only to alleviate your difficulties and your suffering, but also for you to become a better person. And it's a very, very simple recipe. Most of us, when we're going through turbulences and problems, we will only think about ourselves. And that's where the problem gets worse. Because if we only consider ourselves, or if we consider that we're the ones that are suffering the most in the entire planet, then we're making everything more complicated, because now not only we're going through the difficulty, but we're also being selfish. And you're probably asking by this time, what should we do then? And the answer is simple. Be altruistic. Think about others. Practice charity. That's the answer. And there are a number of very good references, not only in Spiritism, but also in our scientific research, that supports that idea. Here's one example. A large online survey with over 4,000 American adults have shown that people who volunteer have less trouble sleeping, less anxiety, less hopelessness, and better friendships and social networks, better sense of control over chronic conditions, and are overall happier. Other important papers have also conclusively shown that being altruistic and helping others can actually decrease your stress levels, increase your longevity, and boost your immune system. Here's another example. Schwartz et al. In 2003 investigated whether altruistic social behaviors, such as helping others, were associated with better physical and mental health. So questionnaires were mailed to evaluate giving versus receiving help, prayer activities, positive and negative religious coping, self-reported physical and mental health. After adjusting for age, gender, stressful life events, income, and many other variables, he conclusively showed that giving help was more significantly associated with better mental health than it was receiving help. After listening to this, we should think about times when we're feeling down, where everything seems to be collapsing upon us, and all we ask is for help. We ask for help all the time, and we want to receive help. But how many times we thought about giving help, especially for people who are going through much more difficult situations than our own? Not only helping ourselves, but helping others, because that's the pathway for you to be a happier, healthier person. And one of the most amazing publications on this topic was published in Science in 1980 by a team of Niram, Levesque, and Cornhill. They've started to set up a study to analyze the effects of a diet high in fat and cholesterol in rabbits. And they were expecting a very straightforward result, which is that if you eat more fat and cholesterol, you're going to have more atherosclerosis and other diseases associated with it. But the results were really surprising. One subgroup of rabbits had 60% less atherosclerosis than the group as a whole, even though they ate the same diet, which did not make any sense based on the setup of the study. The only notable difference in treatment was that the healthier subgroup was fed and cared by a lab assistant who took them out of their cages, patted them, and talked to them before feeding. The study was repeated twice with the same results. So that also makes us think, when we're all concerned about our health and everything around us, but we forget that giving love or sharing love is way more important than anything else. If you start thinking about this, I can guarantee you that life is going to change, because this is what Jesus wants from us. And we can see this over and over in the Gospels. as Paul wrote to Corinthians, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass, or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all the mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have faith, so that I could remove mountains, and have not charity, I am nothing." Dear friends, thank you once again for being here with us today. I hope this message can go straight into your heart, and we all together start thinking about charity, not only as something that someone told us to do, but also as a medication for our soul and for our evolution. As we're going through this very special time where 1 year is ending and we're starting a new year, 2013, let us all keep our hearts and our minds united with this message of charity, of helping others, of changing ourselves, and moving forward, living by the message that Jesus Christ brought to us. Have a happy new year, and God bless us.
We will return to our program after these messages.
Enjoy this new release, Reborn for Love, by the renowned Brazilian scientist and researcher on reincarnation, Dr. Hernani Andrade. This novel describes one of the most extraordinary and genuine cases of reincarnation ever studied by Dr. Andrade's Brazilian Institute of Psychobiophysics Research in Sao Paulo State. Order your copy now at roundtable.uk@gmail.com or at www.roundtablepublishing-uk.com.
Spiritist Network, your gateway to on-demand Spiritist videos. www.spiritistnetwork.com.
Spread the word. Kardec Radio, to learn more about Spiritism.
Want to find a good way to explain life after physical death to kids or teenagers? Check out the book Message from a Teen in the Spirit World by the Spirit Neo Lucio and psychographed by Chico Xavier. In this book, a teenager named Carlos explains his impressions on the new life in the spirit realm with his discarnate relatives and new friends. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
The Spiritist Magazine is a trimestral digital periodical that publishes the latest news on the Spiritist thought and the movement in the USA and worldwide. Subscribe now at www.spiritistmagazine.com.
In the book, A Primer on Being Good by the Spirit Maymay, psychographed by the medium Chico Xavier, explains in simple language appropriate for children two paths in life, the path of good or the path of evil. God has granted us the freedom to choose either one. Purchase your copy online at www.ssbaltimore.org.
Now we return to our program.
Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to the Spiritist Moment. I am your host, Kirsten DeMello. We give continuation on the study, part 3 of the Spirit's book, The Law of Reproduction. This week we'll be discussing about marriage. If you'd like to follow along with us, we'll be discussing questions 695 through 697, and also the book After the Storm by the Spirit, Joanna De Angelis, by the medium Givaldo P. Franco. And actually it's chapter 13 from the book After the Storm, entitled Separation and Divorce. So we learn specifically from the Spirit's book. Let's discuss how they define how we come to understand what marriage is. Well, they tell us that marriage is not a law of nature. Rather, it's proof positive of our progress. And that if we abolish marriage, then we become like animals. And we quote from the Spirit's book, the Spirits tell us we abolish marriage, it's a return to the life of the animals. And they even go on to tell us that we become beneath the level of the animals because there's even certain animals in the animal kingdom that are able to remain celibate to one person, or monogamous rather, to one other animal. So we know that it really is proof positive of the progress we are making as a humanity. And also, one other important fact for us to remember is question 697, and it states, does the absolute indissolubility of marriage belong to the law of nature, or is it only a human law? And the spirits wisely tell us it is a human law that is quite contrary to the law of nature, but humans may modify their laws, only those of nature are immutable. So we know, and we can also read about it in the Gospel according to Spiritism, that divorce is not wrong in the eyes of God. It is merely a manifestation of a legal manifestation of a separation that already exists between a union of two people. So we learn that also marriage is something good. Oftentimes we see in movies and in different stories, and we think that, oh, marriage is bad or marriage is so hard. And in actuality, it takes a great deal of work. All things that are good actually take hard work to obtain. For example, our own spiritual evolution and our progress takes a great deal of work. But as Joanna DeAngelis in the book After the Storm, she says that generally, and we quote, moral virtues are better developed in marital relationships. She also states in the opening of her chapter that as a general rule, marriage is a laboratory for emotional readjustments and a shop for moral reparations. And that is a very deep and profound statement by Joanna, because we learn that oftentimes the issues we have, our greatest issues, are our relationship issues that we have with one another. But we are comforted by the fact that marriage, as she states, is a great opportunity for us to really build our moral virtues and to really grow spiritually speaking. She also goes on to talk about divorce, not in the sense that, oh no, we should not ever do it, which is from olden times, but rather, before we make any type of decision, we should think very thoroughly about it and think about perhaps at times during the unions that we have, the marriages that we are in, sometimes there's children involved, so we should think very deeply about the situation before we make any decisions. Lastly, she ends by humbly saying that if someone does not, of his own free will, desire to remain with you, do not become a shackle or a prison to him. Each person takes the road he prefers and lives the life that is pleasing to him. Yet wherever he may go, he will experience the conditions in which he deserves to be. Have patience and trust in God. Keep cheerfully in the expectation that whatever you do not possess today and will be your life's fortune later on. If you are alone and your strength is failing, give yourself another opportunity in noble and devoted love. So in all things, she tells us to have strength, to have courage. Naturally, as spiritists, we also give the suggestion of utilizing prayer to connect with our spirit guides and those good spirits that are with us that want to assist us. And one last thing, dear friends, before we end our segment today, let us not utilize this information to judge one another. Now, in most modern times, we do not stone one another, but sometimes our negative thoughts and judgments, we do so with our thoughts. So let us be kind and gentle and indulgent towards one another, but let us be more observant with our own thoughts and our own deeds first, as we are always taught this in the Gospel. So as always, dear friends, we wish you many blessings until next time.
Dear listener, as we're coming to the close of the program today, it's the last program of Kardec Radio in 2012, and we bless this year as we're thankful for the many learning experiences that it provided to us. And for God, we thank for the opportunity of living this most beautiful year, one that really represents a shift in our own lives. And before we wrap up with our prayer, because, we need to join our hearts in prayer every show, at the end of the show, so we can pray to others, pray to one another. We would like to thank Maria Cristina Delgado, who kindly sent her message to Kardec Radio. It's a pleasure to listen to Kardec Radio. Thanks a million. Thank you, Maria Cristina. We'd like to thank all the listeners who have been writing to us through our Facebook page or through our email. Thank you so much. And, as Allan Kardec said, it is always great to be amongst our Spiritist family. As Luis Sergio reported, about an excerpt that we discussed previously. He quotes from Allan Kardec a passage when he said, so given that we cannot be spiritists with feelings of resentment in our heart, I'm proud to count on friends belonging to the later group of charitable spiritists, because if I have any defect, they will know how to excuse it. Thank you, dear Allan Kardec, for saying these words. As Abigail told our dear Paul, we hope that this comes true at a large extent in each one of our hearts, because this is why the promised Comforter came to us. Before the prayer, let us listen to this beautiful message in form of a song by the very friend James Marotta. It's about a message of us glorifying, worshiping God, because that's why we're living here. Because of God, there's no other reason, and so we shall worship Him. Let us listen to this, rejoice. After the song, we're going to pray together.
Imagine how you would have felt if you had seen that star lighting the way through the night. Imagine how it must have been to know that single night would change the life of humankind forever. And then people from all places came to visit the newborn, 'cause the prophecies had said he was a present from the Lord. Glory to God in the highest, goodwill toward all men. Glory to God in the highest, there will be peace on earth. He had no army and no gold, but he would clearly show what we need to know to set our spirits free. Before he came, the world was dark. He brought the light of love. From that day on, the seed began to grow. And then people from all places came to visit the newborn, 'cause the prophecies had said he was a present from the Lord. Glory to God in the highest, goodwill toward all men. Glory to God in the highest, there will be peace on earth. Glory to God in the highest, goodwill toward all men. Glory to God in the highest, there will be peace on earth.
Dear listener, here we are at the end of a year, mostly grateful. Please join us now. Join us in this opportunity of praying together. Let us close our eyes and open our minds and hearts even more deeply. praying that humanity receives a shower of healing light, healing the wounds of our hearts so we can renew ourselves. Dear God, Mother, Father of our lives, each and every day we become more deeply aware of your unconditional love for us. Thank you for sending illuminated minds to our lives. May our families, our closest acquaintances, receive the shower of light. But most importantly, may all the people on the earth who are thinking of crimes receive a light touch of love in their hearts. It is you calling them to their divine nature, so they may leave the realm of inner ignorance to embrace their divine pathway, much like Saul transforming himself into Paul, the one who is meek, who surrendered to your love. May we become peacemakers in this year by attuning to your messengers, our guardian angels, the kind paternal maternal presence of your love in our everyday lives. May our guardian angels receive our hug of gratitude for having guided us throughout the year of 2012, leading us in a new pathway of learning, loving, and serving in 2013. Dear Father, Mother God, bless the team of Kardec Radio for their loving presence in our lives. And may the whole Spiritist movement draw itself even more united in this movement of service today and always. May all those who are suffering receive a helping aid anywhere they are. And may these thoughts be multiplied by your love in a shower of blessings to all the leaders, the governors of the nations on our planet. May they serve you and make your will be done on the earth as it already is in heaven. And so be it. Dear listener, we have beautiful programs coming along in 2013 where we can share with you while we update our website at Kardec Radio that the first program is dedicated to happiness. Happiness that, as in Spiritism it says, happiness that comes with the alignment of our conscience with the laws of God. And to help us align Spiritism and science even more deeply, we're going to be honored with the presence of Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky, who is going to tell us about her books, The Hows and Myths of Happiness. Actually, the book, The Myths of Happiness, is going to be launched as we will be speaking in a week. She's going to be launching the book while we'll be here at Kardec Radio. We hope you don't miss it because you know Kardec Radio is here to nourish your soul. Many blessings. Happy New Year.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.